Right, today, as part of our Let Your Imagination Run Wild series, we'll be talking with author Ġorġ Mallia. So, Ġorġ, could you kindly introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Well, I work at a university. In other words, I teach there. I'm also the head of the Department of Media and Communications. So that's an area which fascinates me because, of course, we live in a world where communications are extremely important. In fact, right now, as everybody knows who will be watching this video immediately after we record it, we are living alone at home. And if it wasn't for communications, we would not be able to do what we're doing right now, for example, which is absolutely wonderful. So it's something that fascinates me. I also write and draw. I love doing cartoons, and I like painting, and I like, I write non-stop, and I paint non-stop and draw non-stop. So basically, whenever I'm not lecturing or running my department or, well, doing all sorts of other things, I'm actually writing and drawing. So that's what I do.
Okay. And obviously, you've published quite a number of different books. Can you tell us perhaps about a couple of them and what inspired you to write them, perhaps?
I mean, I've written a lot of books, primarily because that's my favorite area. They are for children, so they are for different ages, actually, as well. In fact, I think most children in Malta will be acquainted with my Pullu series of books, for example, because many of them do them in primary school at the very beginning. Then they're part of their readers, if you know what I mean. I actually have one of them here, which was the last one of the series. And Pullu is this little teddy bear who lives underground and who comes up to visit his friends who are overground, obviously. And the book actually started when my daughter was about 6 years old. And I think she was ill at one point, and she would always say, "Tell me a story," and I would of course come up with a story off the top of my head. And this story popped into my head, and I told it to her. She really liked it, and she wanted me to draw it, and I did. I drew a few pictures for her, and I met a publisher, a friend of mine, and I was mentioning that I was telling this story to my daughter, and he said, "Okay, can you do a series of books for us?" And I did. It took me a long time, but I did, because they are full color illustrations, so they do take a long time to do. And they one thing that very few notice about those books is that in all the Maltese in them, there isn't a single word with an ein in it. You know, the GH, which is so weird to the Maltese language. And I did that on purpose because, of course, they are intended to be beginning readers. So, and people, of course, young readers find it very difficult to actually, work with the ein in Maltese. I mean, they get it later, but at that point in time. So I said, why can't I find words that don't have an ein? And throughout the series, there isn't a single word with an ein in it. So that was a bit of a job, but it worked nicely. Another book that seems to be extremely popular at this point in time is my Professur Asfur, which is also being read quite extensively. I think the first edition sold out entirely, and they've reprinted it. And something I can sort of give away here is that book 2 is at the moment at the publishers. So we're hoping to have book 2. I mean, it would have been out already had it not been for this pandemic. But as it is, it's postponed till after things go back to normal. But there it is. I love this one. I love the character. First of all, it's narrated by a girl, Katrina, a very, very bright young girl, who meets this eccentric professor who's always coming up with all sorts of weird inventions. The first one, they're leaping around from one dimension to the next, coming across things that are very, typical of those dimensions, but also a bit typical of our world and our countries particularly. Things like, a dimension where the cars have taken over, a dimension where the buildings are everywhere and there's no place to move anywhere, So things that are ecological. I have a bee in my bonnet about ecology. I really like, I like the idea of clean air. I like the idea of green spaces. So I work that into all of my books. A particular favorite, is this one. My first book in English, actually. It's called Sigurd and the Tree of Life. It's a bit of a fantasy about the last of the good wizards who lives in a forest up north, and the whole book is a quest to save the Tree of Life, which has been poisoned. So there you go, my ecology again. I think the most wonderful things about this book, if you don't mind my saying so, is the actual illustrations, because they are based. I used to live in Sweden for quite a long time, and they have something called tomtenisar there. Those are the Santa's elves, and very often at Christmas, especially, they decorate with sort of puppets of them, and they have huge hats with big noses and no eyes and stuff like that. And I based my illustrations actually on those tomtenisar, even though this has nothing to do with that. Well, it does happen up in the north, but apart from that, that's the only reason. Well, I have quite a few others, but I think I mentioned enough. I mentioned 3. I think those are enough for your followers, if you like, to go look up.
Absolutely interesting. And I do know quite a few young readers who have read some of your books, especially the Asfur book, actually.
It's quite a popular one. It's quite popular. I'm happy to say. That means it gave me the possibility to write some more about him. And there are so many stories I can tell about Professor Asfur. The next one actually happens somewhere else. And the first one, as I mentioned, I can't give this away. The second one is in space. So, yeah. There you go.
So, Ġorġ, most of your books, as we've just seen, are written in Maltese. Why do you choose this language, and do you have, or do you think there are any barriers to using it?
Well, it's a beautiful language, and it's our language, and you can say things in Maltese about Malta and about what we feel in Malta that you can't even say in English. Now, and the Maltese are bilingual. They read both Maltese and English. We speak both Maltese and English. But a language pretty much describes, if you like, the soul, the being of a country. And Maltese has sounds in it that will describe certain things that happen here, like the weather, etc., etc., that we cannot really translate into English. I mean, I usually like to use one word. There's one word which we use in Maltese, which is not very common actually, which is Oma. It's a beautiful word. Listen to the sound of it. It's a beautiful word. And it describes that sort of summer heat that comes from the desert. Now, obviously, we can't use that in English. The English do not have Oma. They don't have that sort of heat. So obviously they don't have a word that describes it. We need a number of words to describe it. So I also love the sound of Maltese. It's a very onomatopoeic language. So to answer your second question, no barriers. I would say quite a few advantages, because the language itself is such a beautiful, poetic language. And if used the right way, especially with the sounds being important, then it becomes a very, very good literary language, a good language in which to actually tell stories.
Absolutely agree. So most of our audience are children and teens. Do you have any advice for anyone who might want to start writing their own books, and also perhaps where they should start from?
I wouldn't be surprised that this is something that's been told to them over and over and over again. I think the start of writing is reading. You read some more, you enjoy it, and then at some point you stop reading, you write. And then you stop writing for a bit and you read again. And you continue doing that, and you read, and then write a bit, and then read some more. Because that's what that is about in the end. We get our inspirations from other writers. They are the ones who fill our worlds with fantasy. So for me, for example, I used to, read. I was a bookworm when I was 9, 10, etc. I used to read non-stop. I used to read a book a day over summer, I think, if I remember correctly. And then around about 9 years of age, I said, why don't I write a book during summer? And so I started writing a book per summer. So summer holidays were spent reading and writing. And I have to admit that looking back, those were fun times, because I could just, give vent to my imagination. Yes, I drew as well. And I do encourage people who like to draw, because there's this thing about illustrating. Most children's books are illustrated, for obvious reasons, because of course we also need to see the visual dimension of children's books. Now, I also illustrate my own books, which is an advantage. Why? Because when somebody else illustrates your writing, what they're doing is they're taking what they see in your writing and putting it into visuals, putting it into pictures. But when you illustrate your own, that's a different thing altogether. Because what you do is you can actually put things in your drawings that aren't entirely in the writing, and they complement each other. They continue, one stops, the other starts, etc., etc. I have to admit that when I'm writing, I'm always sketching. So I would say, if there are those of your young readers who would also like to be writers and who also like to draw, wonderful, do them both. And do them both at the same time, because that really is a wonderful way of expressing yourselves.
Agreed. So one last question, Ġorġ, I have for you. What would be perhaps the best advice you've received yourself and which you could share with us?
Well, when it comes to drawing, of course, the best advice I've ever had was sort of do 100 drawings a day. But when it comes to writing, it was the same advice I've just given the kids. It was read as much as you can, but also analyze. Don't just read for the story. While you're reading, look at the way the story is being told. I mean, I have favorite writers, obviously. Okay, I mean, I started off by, I love fantasy. I love science fiction. I love all of these things that can push you into totally different worlds. I have to admit, I devoured J.R.R. Tolkien with his, with his Middle-World trilogy, etc., and all the rest of them, Lord of the Rings, and of course even The Hobbit before that, so on and so forth. And I have to admit, I loved the Harry Potter series because of the way that J.K. Rowling writes. She makes it look so simple, but when you examine the way she writes, everything is clear. The characters develop themselves, you see. So I would say, if you're reading, read for the story, enjoy it, love it, etc. But once in a while, try to understand how the writer is telling that story and try to imitate, and using your own story, of course, in the meantime. That's what I was told, and I'm saying this also to the kids who would love to write. And I'd love to read their writings, because that's something that is absolutely wonderful. And tell them to share it as well. It's not enough that they write them. They don't write them and put them in a drawer. Tell them to pass them around. I used to draw comics when I was about, I was at secondary school. And I used to draw a comic a month. And we had 30 kids in the class, and it would go to one kid per day. And it would then go the rotation. This was something that happened regularly for about 2 or 3 years, I think. So I did quite a lot. I created a character called Hurricane, a superhero. Okay, and I would draw sort of a 24-page comic a month. So it would go all the rounds. And the feedback I got from the kids, some of it was very nasty feedback, but that was fine. That also taught me a few things. But most of the time, feedback was very constructive. We knew what they liked, and they would tell you. So don't just write it and put it away. Give it to your friends to read out. Okay? I mean, if possible, sit down and read it together, because that's absolutely wonderful. It's one way of doing things. And let them tell you what they think. And don't be hurt if somebody says something which is intelligent. Okay, if somebody's being nasty, then just ignore them. But you understand my point. Okay? So what they do is get your feedback and then put it back into your writing. Because that is really, really the way to grow.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for your time, George. And we obviously hope to read many more of your books.
Let's hope that they enjoy them. Okay, take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.